Welcome to this edition of Go Vote Omaha, presented by the League of Women Voters of Greater Omaha. I'm MaryLee Moulton, president of the League of Women Voters of Nebraska, and I'm joined by Rachel Gibson, vice president of Action for the Nebraska League, to talk about the new unicameral session. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization and does not endorse political candidates or parties, but we do take positions on issues that have been researched by our organization. Our purpose is to empower voters and defend democracy. Go Vote Omaha focuses on policy issues, and as a result of our discussions, we hope you will feel ready to make informed decisions during election time. Today, we are focusing on what to expect from the 108th legislature. The Nebraska legislature started its session on January 4th for a 90-day session. This is the long session because they will approve a budget for the state. Just as a refresher, the Nebraska legislature is a nonpartisan unicameral, meaning just one house of 49 senators from across the state. The second house is you, the people of Nebraska. And since every bill has a hearing in committee, there is plenty of opportunity for our senators to hear from you. Rachel, the session got off to an exciting start and a win for Nebraskans that made their voices heard. Can you tell the viewers about what happened?
I would be delighted to. So as MaryLee mentioned, we are in the 108th session of our legislature here in Nebraska. And what that means is we have 2-year-long sessions. So this is the beginning of this group of senators getting together to make law for Nebraskans. So one of the very first things they do is kind of get themselves in order. So that's picking their committees. It is selecting their committee chairs. It's also setting out the rules. So that's what's been happening the past few weeks as bills are being introduced. And it has been an exciting start. The committee process saw some changes. So for example, the Education Committee, which was previously led by Senator Lynn Walls of Fremont area, she was voted out and replaced by Senator Merman, who has served on the committee, but he's now the chair. So there are a couple of things like that kind of caught people off guard at the beginning. And then we moved on to the rules portion of this.
And there were a lot of rules suggested.
Yes, a lot of rules. Yes, there were 58 rule proposals, and those are from the senators themselves about how they're going to run their time together. This is a record, and previously there's usually like maybe 20. So there were a lot more rules, and they really ranged the gamut from things like, what order do we put motions in to can you have firearms in the Capitol during hearings, things like that. So this was a huge win for the people because we anticipated that there were going to be some pretty big fights about the rules, particularly around what's called the secret ballot, and that's voting for committees, whether that's a record vote or not, and a few other things. And it really, people got out there and let their senators know. There were over 100 people at the hearing itself from all different backgrounds, all different parts of the state. And gave feedback. And it was really wonderful because they whittled that list of 58 down, depending on how you count, to 7 that they brought to the floor today. And it went through fairly smoothly. So it was an unexpected start in some ways, but we're off to the races now that we've got our rules in place and we're done with bill introduction.
Okay, well, we are done. And it was close to a record, not quite. I believe 812 or 814 bills that were introduced to the unicameral.
It was, so when you count the bills and the resolutions, because there's 2 different types, 843.
Wow.
843. Mm-hmm.
And in Nebraska, every bill, every resolution gets a hearing in committee. So it's going to be a very, very busy time trying to make sure all of these bills get hearings. We obviously don't have time to spend more than a few minutes on some highlights. So let's talk about bills that the league is going to be following in a couple of different categories. And let's start with the voter ID and voting rights restoration, because obviously the League of Women Voters is a voting organization. So we're always keenly interested to see what people are proposing, what senators are proposing to change as having to do with voting and voting rights.
Yeah, that is a fantastic question. And that there are several bills related to voting and voting access. The biggest conversation, as you mentioned, is going to be around that voter ID. So the voters passed a measure in our last election that the legislature needs to write rules to incorporate voter ID in our election processes. So that's basically giving it over to the legislature and say, photo ID, go. So now our legislature has to make the rules around that. And we have seen quite a range of things submitted. There are sort of three main bills that are large bills that encompass a lot of things. And then there are tons, dozens and dozens of smaller bills that could find their way in. But those three main bills are brought from three different senators. Senator Erdman has brought 228, which is a monster of a bill. Senator Slama has brought 535, and then Senator Day has brought 675. And the first two I mentioned, Senator Erdman's and Senator Slama's, are similar in some ways. They're on the more restrictive side. In fact, Erdman's bill is exceptionally restrictive. It does make voting day a holiday, but at the same time, it does away with all mail-in voting. The rules as far as what you can use for ideas are pretty rigorous. So that one is one that we are concerned about, but it is so extreme that we're hoping folks understand that that's not accessible to voters.
Right. And I mean, in Nebraska, vote by mail has become incredibly popular. It's such an easy way to vote. And in the most recent election, I know that the greater Omaha area, Douglas County, I think more than half the people who voted by mail. So that would be a huge difference. Plus, we have 11 counties that, because they're under 10,000 people, they vote all by mail. That's it. There are no, I think they have one polling place at the county clerk's office, and that's it. So it would be a drastic change.
Yeah. Well, and to clarify, when we talk about that vote by mail, that's also the ballot drop boxes. So if you filled out your ballot beforehand and you didn't put it in the mail, but you put it in a drop box, that's technically vote by mail. So it's really anything outside of that, going to the polling place and voting, is what we're talking about when we're talking about vote by mail. So excellent point. Senator Slama's bill is also on the restrictive side. It's not quite as restrictive, but there are definitely some very strict rules about what types of IDs can count. And the reason this matters, and the reason why the league is concerned, is for a lot of folks, having an ID, no big deal. They have a driver's license, that sort of thing. But there are definitely certain populations that have a harder time having that ID. For example, elderly. They haven't needed an ID forever in some cases in a nursing home, or, folks who live in communities where it's hard to get to a DMV. There's one DMV to the east of 72nd in Omaha. So it's one of those that we want to make sure we're making it as accessible as possible.
Right. And then there's going to be issues of education, funding for voter ID, so that people are not obstructed from voting because of a cost of voter ID. There are a lot of things like that have to be addressed.
Well, and timeline, to your point, is another one, which is one of the things we really liked about that third bill I mentioned from Senator Day, is it wouldn't need to be implemented until 2026 for that election. So it gives enough time for folks to get used to this change. So those three bills, I think, are ones that we'll definitely be looking at. And we've mentioned the numbers there, and you can get on the website and take a look at them in detail.
Okay. And then one of the things that the league has been involved with is a coalition that is interested in making sure that once someone has served their time and served their parole, paid their debt to society, they get to vote again. So can you talk a little bit about LB 20 from Justin Wayne?
Yes. So there are actually two pieces of legislation that are in this area. The primary one is one we've seen before from Senator Wayne, LB 20, and basically it's upon completion of serving your time and your probation, then you are a voter again. You're part of society, part of the community, and there's no restrictions. Right
now, there's a 2-year wait after that, correct?
Correct. Yes. So it really just makes it so that once you're back in the community, you being active civil really is part of that process.
Right. Which I think is important.
It's very important. And, once you get moving past those 2 years, you're doing your life. It's sometimes harder to get back in the habit. So the other piece of legislation is from Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, who actually brought a legislative resolution for a constitutional amendment.
Mhm.
And that is saying that all felonies other than treason, folks have the ability to vote once they've finished their time. So those are two that we're keeping an eye on. Senator Wayne has brought similar bills before. We're really hoping that with, as you mentioned, the coalition behind us, we're able to really push that forward and allow people to be involved in their communities, help make them better.
Right. And I think a lot of people who, have been system impacted are going to be testifying. And I think that, senators will be surprised by, how widespread this is and how it's in all of our communities. And we want to, when someone has paid their debts to society, want to reintegrate them. And voting is a great way to reintegrate people.
Yep. Great point. Great point.
Another big hot topic, obviously, is reproductive rights. There have been a very kind of egregious bill that was introduced. That's something that the league in general is not very happy with. So can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, since the Dobbs decision and overturning Roe, we've known that there's the plan to put it some form to further restrict abortion in Nebraska. Currently, that we do have restrictions on abortion in Nebraska, but there's
correct.
Say again.
20 weeks, right?
20 weeks. Mm-hmm.
Right.
So there already is that restriction, and what this is doing is really pushing it back quite far. So we're talking about LB 626, which Senator Albright brought. It's called the Nebraska Heartbeat Act, and what this would do would make abortions beyond 6 weeks illegal. And if you have been pregnant or know someone who's been pregnant, they probably didn't know they were pregnant at 6 weeks. That's right. Really early. And the consequences for that, I think, are also a really important part of this conversation. The consequences, the revoking of the license of the physician. Mm-hmm. So whoever provides that care would then no longer be able to practice. So there's definitely some concern there about how extreme, how drastic this is. Mm-hmm. In addition to taking away the ability for women to make their own healthcare decisions, this is impacting the ability for doctors and healthcare providers to stay in our state. Mm-hmm. So that's the big bill that's sitting out there.
Right. And the league, understands that this is a very hot topic for the senators. And we shared a letter with them kind of talking about some of the consequences to doing something very extreme. And can you just kind of tell us a little bit more about some of the things we shared with them?
Yeah, as we were talking to different folks and different members in our organization, talking through all the fallout from that. So some of those are economic, frankly. So that is when you think about doctors may not want to practice in our state. It might go so far as the inability for certain programs of training to be certified in our state if you can't practice a certain kind of medicine. It's also going to make it incredibly hard, especially for our rural communities, because they won't be able to recruit folks who are out there for fear of prosecution or losing their license. We also talked about the ability even to recruit college students. We talk a lot about growing our state, and a big piece of that is our wonderful college institutions. And we have 3 or 4 here in Omaha, but students these days don't want to attend a state, regardless of really what the details of the bill are, that it feels as if women's voices aren't heard and considered. And that's definitely what this bill represents. So those were just a few of the pieces we highlighted to folks. And then, of course, the just medical issues of how does this work when you have, for example, an atopic pregnancy? How does this work with IVF? Now, I will say that 626 does try to outline some things that it doesn't mean to be doing, but the way it's written, it's not as strong as it could be, and it still leaves gray room for those physicians.
Right. Well, let's move on to education, because that is always a topic of discussion in the Nebraska legislature, financing it, property taxes tied to it. So tell us about some of the education bills that the league is going to be following.
So we're kind of following education is a hot topic this year. We're looking at kind of 3 main areas that bills have come in. One is the first one, the funding that you mentioned. And if you've been following at all, what our new governor is suggesting, he's calling for an overhaul of how we fund our schools. So that's the first one we're looking at. He has worked with senators and put forth a plan. In our initial lookings at the plan, it's okay. There are definitely things we'd like to see improved, but there are also pieces that are good. There's an increase in funding for students with disabilities. But it does at its base change how much money is provided to different school districts. And the way that that's calculated, we're waiting to see the details and the numbers, but we're worried that there are some rural and urban schools that face different challenges. For example, school is 40 miles away. You need a bus that costs more money. If you have a bunch of English language learners, that's going to cost more money. We're worried that that's going to leave some students behind. So waiting for the details on that one.
So it's briefly, it's $1,500 of state aid per student. So that every student in Nebraska would receive the state aid. And they're talking about putting $1 billion in a trust account that would be used in case the budget ever needed to be cut or things like that. So it is a big increase in education spending by the state, which is good.
It is. And that's the piece we really love, especially that second piece you mentioned, to kind of buffer so services don't get cut. The first part we're a little concerned about because oftentimes the first step towards a voucher program or the money goes with a student program starts with every student gets X amount, a base funding model. So that's one that we're just keeping an eye on. And that one, you really get in the weeds, but I would say, listen to our educators, they're living it so they can tell you what that actually means in their schools. So that's one we're looking at with funding. One of the other ones we're looking at with funding is something people might have heard of before, which is called the Opportunity Scholarship Act. This bill has been brought, I think this is the 5th year, if I remember correctly, from Luann Linehan. And what this would do would provide a tax benefit to individuals and organizations that provided scholarships to be used at private schools. So it's not a direct money to private schools because you just can't do that. But it's kind of a workaround in a way to allow for public dollars to be used to the benefit of private schools. So that's one that, we've looked at how that works in other states and really where the money's going. It's benefiting the donor as opposed to necessarily the student. And when you have this amount of dollars, where are they going?
Right. And then as far as that goes, they're talking about the entity that just created this pass-through entity would get 10% off the top to pay for, whatever salaries of who's going to run it.
Yeah.
And, that type of thing is very problematic to see tax dollars going to something like that.
Exactly. The other piece that I think gets lost in this too is private schools don't have the same necessarily oversight, and they also don't have the same requirements for admission. So those funds could go to an organization that could deny a student for their sexual orientation or their religious affiliation. So they don't have the same requirements. And I think that's probably our biggest concern is, tax money should be going to something is available to all of our students.
Right. And has oversight.
Yes, absolutely.
That makes a big difference. So, and then you said there was a third area too, Rachel?
Yeah, so there's that funding area. We saw a lot of bills about teacher recruitment. I won't jump into those, but there were several and we're moving with momentum on those, which I think are wonderful. The third area we're seeing is some of these, culture war issues that you hear nationally. There's a push for a Parents' Bill of Rights bill. There's a bill called My Student, My Choice. And these would put restrictions on either, basically it would have parents allowed to say, I want my child to be exempt from a certain element of learning. This is really geared towards sex ed, but the way the bill is written, a child could choose to be exempt from almost anything. So there's some issues with that for sure. There's also the idea of the My Child or My Student, My Choice bill is allowing students to use taxpayer money to go to schools that fit those beliefs as opposed to a public school that's there. So we're seeing that. We're seeing some anti-transgender bills related to sports. We're seeing some things that are at the national level that really at the local level we're not seeing issues with. So those are ones that we're concerned to see, but at the same time, gosh, we got other things that we really need to focus on when we're talking policy in Nebraska.
Mhm. Well, one of the other areas that's really important in Nebraska, across the state from urban to rural, is housing. And I think that's something that we're really interested in seeing the legislature make some moves on to really help with. What have you seen come down the pike on that so far with bills?
Housing is a really exciting area, actually. We had, especially with the ARPA funds that came in, we had an influx of money that went particularly to South and North Omaha. And we're seeing a lot of bills that are either building on that, and also the rural community, I should say. I'm just thinking because we're here in Omaha, that's where my mind went. But we are seeing some bills that build on not only funding for that, seeing that this is a useful thing, but also making tweaks to programs that already exist. So there's some that are investing more money into our rural housing affordability. There's one from Senator Breezy, 249, that kind of changes the rules so that money can be used more efficiently. You can stack grants, things like that. There's one from Senator McKinney, which LB 629, which is expanding the definition of what areas can use that money. So it may not be directly a community, but people who live just outside the community have access to those funds. So we're seeing a lot of different housing bills with that momentum. The other housing bills we're seeing, and in the Omaha area, we've really seen the impacts of this and why we need this type of legislation lately, are about tenant-landlord relation. So it's things like a Clean Slate Act. Certain tenants can't be denied based on, for example, if they were evicted from a previous place that they lived, maybe through very little or no fault of their own. There are also bills about, a registry of everywhere that has renters, that offers rentals, so that you can kind of keep tabs on who offers what and that type of thing. So there's several bills that are kind of those rental landlord tenant rights that especially in the Omaha area, I think could really make a difference.
Okay. Any other bills that you want to highlight before we move on?
I would like to circle back to the abortion conversation, the reproductive rights, if that's okay, real quick.
Sure.
We spend so much time focusing on the big bill that has a lot of attention, and as it should, but there were also some really wonderful bills brought that get at the heart of the concerns. So for example, Senator Hunt brought a protect right to reproductive freedom constitutional amendment proposal. Senator Conrad brought a protect individual right to privacy, which is really what is at the heart of this conversation. And Senator Day brought a provide criminal and civil immunity for pregnancy outcomes. So in addition to the big bill that's got all the stuff, there also we're looking at putting in places, if that does pass, how can we protect women? How can we protect providers in the law? So being ready for what the implications of that might be if it does pass.
Okay, great. Well, let's show our viewers where they can get some information. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we're going to show you our website so that you can see some of the things that we can offer. Okay, so this is our website. It's lwvnebraska.org. And if you come down, we have all sorts of information across the top, and we have this legislative advocacy tab that gives you information. It gives you information on the league and the Nebraska legislature, testimony and letters that we do, some information on reproductive rights, some information on schools, and then our positions and studies, which we base our activities on, as well as congressional action alerts. But if you come down here, it makes things really easy because you can click on legislative advocacy and get to that page. You can find your unicameral senator, and I'm just going to click on this for just a sec.
And I'll shout out that even if you have known who yours is, double check, because we've gone through redistricting now. So there might be some slight tweaks. So definitely double check.
And basically all you need to do is put your address in. And let's find, let's see. So let's take a guess. 12120 80th Street, Omaha. Okay. So that's basically where Nebraska Furniture Mart is. And if you'll see
Wondering
here,
what that was.
yes. And John Frederickson, who is a new senator, is the representative there. So all you have to do is just pop your address in, and you'll be able to find out, what who your senator is. So
And then you can see they have that landing page link there. That takes you right to the homepage. So all the contact information, they make it very easy.
yeah, so just click on that, and that gives you all the information on the new senator, including his email address that you can click on. Okay, let me pop back here. And then there's also, whoops, move that real quick. There's also a button where you can sign up to receive action alerts. And so, Rachel, why don't you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so with the league, there are several ways to get involved. One of the most popular is this action alert. So we know you have lives and children and jobs. Basically, what we do is when we're following the legislature and see something that's one of the bills that we're following, or a big vote is coming up, we'll send out an alert and say, hey, here's what's happening. Here's the background. Now is the time that you should email your senator. Here's what we would suggest. So it's giving you kind of a little snack-sized summary of what's going on at the time that you'll need to get a hold of a senator. So there's no obligation. It is completely a just sharing that information, so it's easier for you all to be involved and to be the second house. So those are our action alerts.
Okie dokie. Anything else you want to, just to give you an idea, we also have latest posts and information about joining the league. And the league actually is also available to come speak to your group. So you can also, take advantage of that. Let me just
Eventually on this, and forgive me if I'm jumping ahead, MaryLee, eventually we'll also post the letters that we write. So we have a group called our action teams, where these are folks who are really interested in a particular area. We look at the bills and we actually write a position letter on behalf of the league. And so this is where, as you can see where MaryLee's pulled up here, once we start submitting those, we post them here so that everyone has access to them. And they're usually just a page long. Here's our why we support or why we oppose. And so if that sounds interesting to you too, we also have a place where you can sign up for an action team.
Okay. All right. Well, we are getting to the end of our show here. That basically wraps things up. We hope to join you in the future with other legislative updates on Go Vote Omaha. Rachel, any final thoughts?
Just you're part of the process. And as we saw with our rules conversation that just happened, the amount of times that the public was referenced and our input really did make a difference, I think is just a great sign for the session coming up.
Okay. Well, for the League of Women Voters of Greater Omaha and the League of Women Voters of Nebraska, I'm MaryLee Moulton.
And I'm Rachel Gibson.
And we urge you to be informed, contact your legislator, be part of the political process, and when election time rolls around again, be a voter and go vote Omaha. Thanks very much.